Next up, the Silicon Bytes episode, Pandora's Box. You'll find links in the description of this video for the sources of this news. And before we get in, thank you to everybody who helps the channel through Patreon or Buy Me a Coffee. Your support at this time is absolutely invaluable. Next up, is the world about to open the Pandora's box of assassination? Escalation. There's been extensive discussion this week of whether it's going too far to remove a leader from the stage to end a war. In this case, the focus is on Ali Hosseini Khamenei, the second supreme leader of Iran since 1989. Before we dive into this topic, we should indulge in some philosophical and legal contemplation. Assassination is a word that has been extensively used in association with Ukraine's campaign to take out Russian military personnel, allegedly responsible for horrific crimes. In the context of war, it's not illegal, however, to target servicing Russian military personnel, and Ukraine shows, in fact, some restraint in that they are only going after those who are implicated in specific crimes, and not for all associates of the murderous Putin regime. So straight away, let's distinguish between taking out serving military personnel, whatever the context. I do not see these as assassinations, and they will not be addressed such in this episode. Instead, this episode will exclusively look at the intentional targeting of politicians, technocrats and journalists, which we'll be referring to as assassination. Based on that definition, we may be entering an uncertain and highly risky era where the taboo against killing leaders is lifted and these acts become normalised. Let's start with Kiev, that has apparently constructed intelligence services containing crack cadres of assassins and may have many more targets in their sights. A statement from Colonel Roman Kostenko, a Ukrainian MP and former Special Forces commander, has sent Moscow propagandists into a frenzy. When in late April he boasted that Mossad campaigns to track down and assassinate senior Nazis would provide a model, a template for Ukraine, he claimed that over the next 10 to 30 years, Ukrainian agents would hunt down Russians responsible for crimes committed during the full-scale invasion, irrespective of how the war eventually ends. A peace agreement would be only the beginning, he said, of a systematic approach to justice and retribution. These people will be punished wherever they are and will be afraid not only to leave the territory of the Russian Federation, but to leave their own houses, Kostenko said. A series of high-profile killings of senior Russian officers inside Putin's Russia attest to their burgeoning capabilities, but these have all been the targeted killings of serving military officers and so aren't individually relevant to this episode. Vasyl Malyuk, who heads the SBU, was open about the objective. The position of the security service is clear and unambiguous. Every crime of the aggressor must be punished, he said. But these acts do raise a philosophical question. If destroying the commanders of the combatants is a step towards victory and justice, then surely taking out those giving the orders, right up to those at the top, will be even more efficacious in reaching those dual goals of justice and victory. But killings by Ukrainian intelligence services using car bombs or targeted shootings are not universally welcomed by Western partners. An early example was the sabotage mission in August 2016 led by HUR's Unit 2245 inside occupied Crimea. This resulted in a firefight with Russian security services in the town of Jankoy, reportedly killing 2 FSB officers. The timidity of Biden was nothing compared to that of Obama, who considered suspending CIA cooperation due to fears of escalation with Moscow. The head of the Defense Intelligence Directorate, General Valery Kondyachuk, was fired under pressure from the Americans, and Joe Biden, vice president at the time, warned Ukraine's leadership it cannot come close to happening again. The US has clearly been tying Ukraine's hands for a long time from fighting back against the existential threat that Russia poses to Ukraine. But full-blown assassination may move back into centre stage as the struggle for victory, or survival even, escalates through 2025 to 26. That is, Russia or Ukraine may feel the desperate need to bring closure to the war as the attrition of both their economies intensifies. Using examples of alleged assassination attempts previously reported or rumoured, let's examine how feasible it might be to take out various key leaders that could have a dramatic impact on the outcome of Putin's war against Ukraine and set their lives against the hundreds of thousands that may yet be lost based on their orders and their delusions. A Russian military commander claimed that President Vladimir Putin's helicopter was at the epicenter of a Ukrainian drone attack in Russia's Kursk Oblast on May 20th this year. Ukraine has not responded to these claims, even with ironic memes or hints, so it may well be a fabricated story by the Russians or some considerable embellishment of reality. We were simultaneously engaged in an air defence battle and ensuring airspace security for the president's helicopter flight, Dashkin, commander of an air defence division, claimed. Why exaggerate such a story? Why would the Russians do this? To make out that Putin takes risks by visiting the front line, perhaps, trying to compete with Zelensky? It could also be an attempt to create a provocation or story with which to threaten the Americans and Germans. Imagine if Ukraine had taken down Putin's helicopter, all hell would break loose. You better cut funding for Ukraine now. That may be the theory behind such a story. But no, Vladimir, the war would end with your demise. It's very unlikely to continue. In January 2025, Tucker Carlson claimed that President Biden had attempted to assassinate Putin. Carlson made this allegation on his podcast after leaving Fox News, but provided no evidence to back up this claim. Dmitry Peskov said that the Russian president is well protected from potential threats, but very soon after saying that, they spun this story about Putin's helicopter coming under fire. It is a little strange. Let's turn to Iran, because that is the next context where threats of assassination have been doing the rounds. Of course, the demise of Iran's hardline spiritual leader and potential collapse of that regime would not directly end the war in Ukraine, but it would deprive Putin of an ally and potentially Russia of some supplies of munitions and technology. Putin may be nervous, prompting Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov to proclaim that regime change in Iran is unacceptable and the assassination of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei would open Pandora's box. Trump suggested the option of assassinating Iran's supreme leader Khamenei remains on the table, but he may just have floated this phrase to see what reaction it got. That comment followed reporting that Israel had earlier proposed a plan to kill Khamenei. In private, Trump apparently vehemently opposed this idea as not being proportionate. Peskov warned any attempt at regime change in Tehran would open Pandora's box, deepening instability across the Middle East and beyond. Regime change in Iran is unimaginable, Peskov said. It should be unacceptable. Even talking about that should be unacceptable for everyone. He added that the killing of Khamenei would promote extremist sentiment inside Iran and provoke unpredictable consequences, while it is just as likely that a more liberal regime would emerge and perhaps more stable one for the region. But as he said, the outcome would be unpredictable and uncontrollable, which of course is something that neither Russia nor the US would want. They both fear situations where they perceive that they have no control. The situation is extremely tense and is dangerous not only for the region but globally, Peskov said. An enlargement of the composition of the participants in the conflict is potentially even more dangerous. It will lead only to another circle of confrontation and escalation of tension in the region. Maybe, but Russia would also lose one of its staunchest allies. Hezbollah has weighed in, warning that the assassination of Iran's supreme leader would have disastrous consequences. Their statement declares that threats to assassinate Khamenei are foolish and reckless and will have disastrous consequences. Merely uttering them is an offence to hundreds of millions of believers and those connected to Islam, and it is utterly reprehensible. Today we are more determined and united around him. But the current wave of targeted assassinations has exposed counterintelligence failures within Iran's security services, and this also may start to help some people see the opportunities behind such operations. It may be that fear of failure is more of a disincentive rather than any political reality or morality. And here Israel and Ukraine are showing that it's possible to execute incredibly ambitious and audacious strikes with remarkable precision. Nearly a week after Israel started striking Iranian territory on June 13th, the status of several high-ranking commanders in the Iranian Revolutionary Guards is still unclear. They include Ismail Qaani, commander of the Quds Force, the elite unit responsible for external operations, Ali Reza Tangsiri, commander of the Guards Navy, and Reza Soleimani, head of the Bazij, the territorial militia groups that operate under the Guards Authority. None of them have made any public statements or appearances, though they were among the regime's most outspoken voices previously. And Russia's condemnation of the assassinations is hypocrisy of the most grotesque kind. Wherever Moscow thought they could act with impunity or achieve success, they've used the tool of assassination for people deemed to be of high value targets of the regime. One example is a reported operation soon after their invasion of Ukraine. People were killed inside my presidential office, Zelensky commented on Russia's assassination attempts in 2022. An attempt to assassinate President Zelensky at the start of Russia's full-scale invasion resulted in people being killed inside the presidential office, he said in an interview with The Guardian published on February 12th. There were people who wanted to kill me. There were gunshots and more. Some people were killed there, directly inside the presidential office. Others were defending us, Zelensky revealed. It was not clarified if the fatalities included Russians, Ukrainians, or both. Zelensky said the assassination attempt took place amid Russia's efforts to pressure Ukraine into accepting painful peace conditions. At least 3 assassination attempts on Zelensky were reported by March 2022 alone, as Russian forces were pushing towards Ukraine's capital before being defeated in the Battle of Kiev. These attacks include a team of elite Chechen soldiers who were eliminated after Ukraine was tipped off by members of Russia's own Federal Security Service, the FSB, allegedly. In May 2024, the SBU announced they had thwarted yet another FSB plot to kill Zelensky. In a more recent story, a Russian agent has been charged in Poland over a new plot to assassinate Zelensky once more. The suspect, Pavel K., was detained in April 2024 because of cooperation between Polish and Ukrainian prosecutors. Polish prosecutors say the suspect expressed willingness to act on behalf of Russian military intelligence and established contacts with Russians directly involved in the war against Ukraine. The activities were to help, among other things, in the planning by the Russian special services of a possible assassination attempt on the life of the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, the prosecutor's office said in a statement. Another key Putin ally, or asset, depending on how you see his role, is Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko. His elimination would have a directly destabilizing effect on Putin's position, especially if the Belarus regime fell to the liberal opposition. It may also deny the territory of Belarus for Russian military operations and any incursions into Ukraine that they are planning. So how likely is his assassination? Yoris Ziankovich, an American, was detained on charges of allegedly plotting to assassinate Lukashenko. But he has since been released from prison in Belarus. Ziankovich was arrested in Moscow in 2021 and then taken to Minsk, where he was accused of participating in a US-backed plot to assassinate the dictator of Belarus. After his release from Belarusian custody, Ziankovich was taken to neighbouring Lithuania, accompanied by US officials. Was there a real plot, or was this a piece of political theatre? At this point, it's not possible to know for sure. Let's also look at Kadyrov, the strongman of Chechnya. Last year, Kadyrov threatened a blood feud, accusing Russian MPs of plotting his murder. There are witnesses, there are people from whom they tried to commission, whom they asked how much they would take for the order, TASS reported Kadyrov as saying, further naming 3 members of Russia's legislature, 2 from Dagestan and 1 from Ingushetia, as being behind the alleged plot. If they do not prove otherwise, I will officially declare a blood feud, Kadyrov threatened. In Chechnya, blood feuds are a traditional custom of extracting revenge by killing an enemy or his male relatives. Chechnya borders both Dagestan and Ingushetia, and Kadyrov has in the past laid claim to parts of both of those regions' territory. Of all the people we've covered, perhaps Kadyrov has the most enemies that could actively deliver upon a desire to eliminate him. But maybe there's little point in risking it if he is genuinely mortally ill and getting weaker politically. Again, his death would almost certainly not end the war in Ukraine, but it would be a significant blow to Putin's power and would threaten to unleash great instability within the Putinist system. To conclude, we may be entering a period where high-profile assassination becomes a tool of geopolitics. The potential rewards are high, such as ending the war in Ukraine, but the risks of failure are also huge, and the risks of instability and chaos following a successful assassination cannot be ruled out. But remember, Moscow condemns murder as a tool of internal politics and geopolitics, but then uses this method whenever it can to silence opposition. Look in the description for a fascinating article on Putin's assassination targets that have been revealed in a recently declassified memo. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence has released a long classified memorandum shedding light on the targeted killings of Vladimir Putin's political adversaries following nearly 8 years of persistent public records efforts. Prominent critics of the Kremlin, and Putin in particular, seem to have a terrible habit of dropping dead under very suspicious circumstances, the article says. Some fall out of windows, some bludgeon themselves to death, or are poisoned, or are said to have committed suicide in ways that defy logic. Well, check out this article. It's a fascinating and terrifying catalogue of the Kremlin's use of targeted murder to further its own interests globally.